In 1994, a limousine stopped in the middle of Michigan Avenue. Not because of traffic, not because of an emergency, because Lionel Richie heard something through a closed window that made him forget every award he had ever won. It was the night of February 28, 1994, and Chicago was doing what Chicago does best in late winter, pushing cold rain sideways through the streets with the kind of wind that makes you question every decision that led you to be outside. The Grammy Awards had just concluded in Los Angeles 3 weeks prior, and Lionel Richie was in Chicago for a private industry dinner, the kind of exclusive gathering where music executives shake hands over deals that will shape what the world hears for the next decade. His limousine was navigating the quiet stretch of Michigan Avenue near the river, carrying him toward an after-party at a hotel suite that overlooked Lake Michigan. Inside that car was one of the most celebrated musicians in the world, a man who had written songs that had played at weddings and funerals and first dances and last goodbyes for 30 years, a man who had heard his own music played back to him 10,000 times in 10,000 different ways. He thought he had heard everything. Daniel Okafor had been in Chicago for 2 years and 4 months. He had come from Lagos, Nigeria, with a music degree, $200, a second-hand guitar, and the particular kind of quiet determination that only people who have genuinely had nothing can carry. In Lagos, Daniel had grown up in a household where music was everywhere. His mother sang in a church choir, his father repaired instruments for a living, and Daniel himself had been performing since he was 6 years old. He had studied Western music theory obsessively, absorbing everything from jazz to gospel to pop, and somewhere along the way he had developed a voice that his professors described as unusually pure. Not loud, not showy, pure in the way that clean water is pure. You notice it because everything unnecessary has been removed. Daniel had arrived in Chicago believing the city would recognize his talent quickly. It had not. He had applied to recording studios, music agencies, and every open mic night within walking distance of his apartment on the South Side. He had been turned away politely, turned away rudely, and in several cases simply never called back. By February of 1994, he was surviving on a combination of restaurant work and street performing, setting up his guitar case on Michigan Avenue 3 or 4 evenings a week and playing for whoever walked by. On a good night, he made $40. On the night of February 28th, he had made $11.40. He had been playing for 2 hours in the rain, which had started light and then decided to commit fully to being miserable. Most of the pedestrians had disappeared, heads ducked under umbrellas or into coat collars, walking fast, not stopping. Daniel was thinking about packing up. He was cold, and his fingers were starting to slow down in the way that guitar players dread, when he decided to play one more song. He decided to play it because it was the song he had practiced the most, the song that had gotten him through the worst moments of the previous 2 years, the song he sang to himself when the city felt too large and too indifferent and too far from everything he had known. He played it for himself because there was almost nobody left on the street to play it for. He began to play Hello. The limousine was moving at about 15 miles per hour when Lionel Richie's body did something his mind hadn't decided to do yet. He sat forward. His hand moved toward the partition separating him from the driver. Later, he would struggle to describe exactly what it was that reached him first, whether it was the tone of the guitar or the opening phrase of the vocal, but something about the sound penetrated the insulated quiet of the car in a way that made every other thought stop. He pressed the intercom. "Pull over," he said. His assistant, Marcus Webb, who was sitting across from him and had been reviewing notes for the evening, looked up. "Is everything all right?"
"Pull over," Lionel said again, and this time his voice had a quality that Marcus recognized. It was the focused, unhurried certainty that Lionel Richie got when he was paying close attention to music. Marcus had worked with him for 6 years, and he had learned not to ask questions when that quality entered the room. The limousine eased to the curb. Through the tinted window, Lionel could see the source of the voice. A young man, tall and lean, wearing a jacket that was clearly not designed for February in Chicago, standing on the sidewalk with a guitar and a small open case at his feet. There were $2 bills visible in the case. The young man's eyes were closed. He was not performing for the street. He was not performing at all, in the way that word usually means. He was just singing, and the singing was one of the most undefended things Lionel Richie had ever heard from a human voice. Daniel Okafor was on the second verse when he became aware, gradually and then all at once, that a long black car had pulled up to the curb 10 feet away from him. He kept his eyes closed. He had learned that making eye contact with passing vehicles while performing usually resulted in nothing, and he was in the middle of something he didn't want to interrupt. He held the last note of the chorus, the word hello, stretched out over 4 beats, and let it dissolve into the rain. He opened his eyes. The window of the limousine was down, and in that window, looking directly at him with an expression Daniel would later describe as somewhere between amusement and something much more serious, was Lionel Richie. Daniel Okafor stopped breathing for approximately 3 seconds. "Don't stop," Lionel said. His voice was calm. "Finish it." Daniel would later say that he had no memory of making a decision in that moment. His fingers found the strings again by themselves. His voice came back up from wherever it had retreated. He finished the song standing in the rain on Michigan Avenue while Lionel Richie watched from the window of a limousine. And when the last chord faded, the only sound was the rain and the distant noise of the city rearranging itself somewhere further down the street. Lionel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I wrote that song, and you just made me hear it for the first time." He opened the car door. What happened in the next 20 minutes was witnessed by Marcus Webb, the limousine driver, whose name was Robert Castillo, and a woman named Patricia Hernandez, who was walking her dog on the opposite side of the street and would spend the next decade telling this story at dinner parties. Lionel Richie stood on the sidewalk in the February rain talking to a street musician he had never met, asking him questions with the focused attention of someone who has just discovered something that matters. He asked about Daniel's training, his background, how long he had been in Chicago, what he was trying to do. Daniel answered honestly, including the part about $11.40. Lionel listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "I'm going to an industry dinner. It's full of people who make decisions about music careers. I'd like you to come with me, not to perform, just to be in the room. Can you do that?" Daniel looked down at his wet jacket and his guitar case with $2 bills in it. He looked back at Lionel Richie. He said yes. Marcus Webb later recalled that when Daniel Okafor walked into that hotel suite carrying a second-hand guitar, the room did not immediately recognize what had just arrived. He was introduced simply as a musician Lionel had heard on the street, and the initial response from the assembled executives and industry professionals was the polite indifference that people in positions of power often deploy when they are uncertain how to categorize someone new. That changed when Lionel asked Daniel to play something, not hello, something of his own. Daniel played an original composition he had written in his apartment on the South Side during the worst month of his first Chicago winter. It was 3 minutes and 20 seconds long. It used a chord progression that moved in ways that several of the musicians present would later struggle to notate accurately. And the vocal performance, delivered in a hotel suite in front of 30 music industry professionals by a man who had been standing in the rain 45 minutes earlier, was the kind of thing that makes rooms go quiet in the particular way that means something real is happening. When Daniel finished, Lionel Richie looked around the room. "Well," he said simply. 3 people asked for Daniel's contact information before the evening was over. Lionel stayed until the end, and then stayed after that, sitting with Daniel in the hotel lobby until nearly 2 in the morning, talking about music the way that people who genuinely love music talk about it, without agenda, without strategy, just following the conversation wherever the ideas went. Before they parted, Lionel made a specific offer. He wanted to connect Daniel with his own producer, a man named Gerald Thompson, who had the ability to hear what a voice could become, rather than just what it currently was. He wasn't promising anything beyond that introduction, but he wanted Daniel to have it. Daniel Okafor called Gerald Thompson the next morning. Thompson took the meeting. And over the following year, the thing that Lionel Richie had heard through a closed window on Michigan Avenue began to take a shape that the rest of the world could encounter.
In 1996, Daniel released his first single through a mid-sized independent label. Lionel Richie was listed as executive producer. The song did not immediately set any charts on fire. What it did was establish Daniel's name in the industry, with the kind of quiet credibility that is harder to build and longer lasting than a sudden viral moment. People who heard it told other people. Radio programmers who listened to it listened again. By 1997, Daniel Okafor had a record deal, a manager, and a touring schedule. He never forgot the $11.40. He kept the $2 bills from that night in his guitar case for the rest of his career, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the specific truth that the distance between obscurity and visibility is sometimes as thin as a car window. Lionel Richie and Daniel Okafor maintained a relationship that deepened over the years into something that resisted easy categorization. Not quite mentor and student, not quite collaborators, but something that partook of both. Daniel sang backing vocals on 2 of Lionel's later projects. Lionel attended Daniel's album release events when his schedule allowed. They shared a quality that people around both of them noticed. They listened to each other with complete attention, the way that only people who take music seriously listen, as though every conversation might contain something worth remembering. In a 2007 interview, Daniel was asked about the night on Michigan Avenue. He said, "People ask me if I knew it was him when the window came down. I didn't. I had no idea. I just knew that someone was listening, really listening, and that felt so rare that it didn't matter who it was. That's what I remember most. Not that it was Lionel Richie, that someone stopped." Lionel, when asked about the same night in a separate interview, said he thought about it more than people might expect. "There are moments when you hear something and you know," he said. "You know it's real, and the question you have to ask yourself is what you're going to do about it. You can keep the window up, you can keep moving, or you can stop." He paused. I stopped. Today, Daniel Okafor performs in venues that bear no resemblance to the stretch of Michigan Avenue where he stood in the February rain with $11.40 in his guitar case. But he still opens certain concerts, the ones that matter most to him, with Hello. Not as a cover exactly, and not as a tribute. He plays it slowly, in his own way, the way he played it that night when he didn't know anyone was listening. He plays it because it is the song that taught him that the right person hearing you at the right moment can change the entire direction of a life. And because some songs carry more weight than they were written to carry, having been pressed into service by the moments that happened around them.
The story of Lionel Richie and Daniel Okafor is not a story about fame or luck or being in the right place. It is a story about what happens when someone who has achieved everything still has the capacity to be stopped by something genuine. In a world that moves fast and values visibility above almost everything else, Lionel Richie pulled a limousine to the curb because a voice in the rain was doing something true. He did not calculate the value of what he was hearing. He did not wonder whether it was convenient. He stopped and he listened, and that listening changed a life. What Daniel Okafor had that night was talent and patience and the stubborn refusal to stop playing even when no one was watching. What Lionel Richie had was something rarer than most people realize in someone who has reached the very top of any field. He still knew how to hear. He had not let success insulate him from the thing that made success matter in the first place. And so when music found him through a closed window on a rainy Chicago street, he recognized it immediately because he had never stopped listening for it. Some windows open because someone pushes them, and some windows open because what's on the other side is too real to ignore. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who is still standing in the rain, still playing their song, still waiting for the right window to open. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had a moment where someone stopping to listen changed everything for you? And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the moments when ordinary courage meets extraordinary opportunity, and music finds a way to do what music has always done: bring the right people together at exactly the right time.